O'Neill, Nat Hentoff, George Wein, and Dr. Billy Taylor tonight. They are here to discuss, among other things, The Ghosts of Harlem, Hank O'Neill's new book, Ghosts of Harlem, Sessions with Jazz Legends, a book of visual and verbal portraits that captures the spirit and soul of the Harlem that once was. During a 40-year career in music, Hank O'Neill formed record companies and recording studios, produced over 200 jazz LPs, CDs, published books and articles on jazz, and served on the boards of various nonprofit organizations, including the Jazz Foundation of America. He has photographed most of the giants of jazz from the second half of the 20th century, and in 2003, his photographic career was summarized in a major profile in the New York Times. I'll let Hank moderate tonight's discussion, and he's going to introduce his fellow jazz aficionados tonight. Following their discussion, we'll pass. Actually, Hank is going to stay here, and he's going to repeat your questions. So please wait for him to call on you, and they'll be happy to answer all of your questions. Hank will then sign copies of his book for you, which you can purchase downstairs on your way out of the store. Those who purchase a book tonight will be entered to win one of two photographs, which Hank will discuss in a minute. He'll give more description about them. And then let's get this started. Let's please give a warm welcome to jazz lovers Nat Hentoff, George Wein, Dr. Billy Taylor, and Hank O'Neill.
Thank you, Christina. It's wonderful to be here. If only because, in a way, I wish that I didn't have this book issue, because I'd just like to sit here and listen to these three guys talk about it, and take me out of the equation. But in any event, what I thought we might do is take just a second for a couple of logistical things that Christina just mentioned regarding the photographs. For folks who sign up, there are two pictures, one of Dr. Taylor outside of Minton's, which is one that I'm very fond of, and a black and white version is in the book, and the other is by a little-known jazz photographer who one of these days might deign to have a show of his pictures of John Coltrane and people like that he just happened to take backstage at a festival or so that he was producing. This is a picture that George Wein took of Dr. Taylor in 1965 at Newport. And if George hadn't decided to produce concerts, he could have been a photographer. Unfortunately, he just didn't do enough of it. And I think you should all watch out for a project that he has of photographs that he did of children of the world over a 4 or 5 year period, all over the world. Just really terrific stuff. And I think you're thinking about an exhibition of those. Well, anyway, these are the prizes, and we can probably get Dr. Taylor to sign these for you. In any event, just a quick thing about the book, just so that you know how it came about and things like that. The genesis was a trip that I took with Shelley Shire and John Hammond in 1985. John telephoned and said that he wanted to go hear a band in Harlem, and would I accompany him? And I realized full well that the reason that John was eager for me to accompany him, one, it would give him good cover to get out of the house, because his wife didn't like him going out that much at that time of his life. And secondly, he knew I had a car that I could drive to Harlem, and it probably wouldn't be stolen or anything, because no one would have it other than myself. But in any event, John and Shelley and I hopped into a car, went uptown, and went up to 135th Street, did a U-turn, and parked in front of Small's Paradise, where John was scheduled to audition a band led by a trombone player named Al Cobbs, who most of you have never heard of. But Al was a journeyman trombone player who at that time was leading a big band. And we all walked into the basement to hear the first set. And when all the the musicians saw that John had come up to hear the band, they all, they looked like kids on Christmas morning. They were so happy he had shown up. Anyway, we heard the band. It was nice. We went outside afterwards, and I had parked my car down on the corner at 134th, and Shelley got in the car, and I noticed that John was just standing and watching, and he was looking at a broken down old building on the corner. The sign was falling off, and it said Hacha Club or Hacha Bar and Grill or something like that. And I said, what you looking at? And he said, oh, this old place. He said, this is the first place I heard Billie Holiday. And from that point, I began to think about the music that had been so vibrant and so important in the evolution of American music that had come out of this part of New York City. And I wondered, what had made it so vibrant? And then why did it leave? Where did it go? And where did the people go who had made it? So I thought about this for a while, and I made a list of about 120 people that I knew were still alive and active, and put their phone numbers down by them. Knew most of them, not most of them, half of them or so. And as luck would have it, someone, an editor friend of mine, called and said, do you have any projects going on? This is when editors actually call people and ask them to write a book. And I said, yeah, I've got one I'm thinking about. And he said, well, what is it? And I said, well, it's a project where I'd like to talk to older jazz musicians who had played uptown, and I've even got a title for the book. And I said, I'm going to call it The Ghost of Harlem. And Les said, that's a great title. I'll bet I can sell that just on the title. And I gave him the title, the list of all the musicians, and he sold it to Doubleday. He was an editor at Doubleday. In any event, it didn't happen. He got pushed out to be an editor of a big company in Japan. Nobody at Doubleday would touch it. And in the meantime, I had conducted maybe 30, 35 of the interviews. And in the mid-90s, the book went on the shelf. I stopped it, unfortunately. The book went on the shelf. And because Shelley and I were busy doing a lot of other concerts and things like that and festivals. And in the mid-90s, a man from the French company Philippe Paquis saw one of the photographs, the photograph of Jonah Jones that's in the book. And he said, what's that photograph from? And I explained to him what it was. And he said, well, we're doing this book right now on Charlie Parker. We really like what you've done on that. Said, we'll do your Harlem book with exactly the same terms. And that's all it took. And that's exactly how it worked. They put the book out in France. It did very well, but never was put out in the United States because they wanted too much money for it. It was a very lavish production and so forth. Fast forward to about 2005, and I was having a conversation with Ahmed Ertegun, who had a copy of the French version of the book, and he asked me why the book wasn't out in English, and I told him Philippe Paquis had the copyright and so forth, or was the publisher of record, and he said, well, this book should be in English. And I said, well, that's terrific, but they haven't been able to sell it. And he said, well, let me see what I can do about that. And he poked a button on the phone, and he called his secretary, and he asked his secretary, he says, Francis, get Danielle on the phone. And I didn't know exactly what this meant. In any event, he was calling Danielle Philippe Paquis, who he suggested should give me back the book so I could put it out in English in the United States, which is exactly what he did about a month later. And it took a while, and through the good offices of David Berger and Holly Maxson, who had done a wonderful book about Milt Hinton for Vanderbilt University Press, I was introduced to those folks who in turn decided they wanted to do this. And the book was officially released last week on the 20th, and that's how it all came about.